Hey everyone, good afternoon. We'll give people a second and then I had some alerts going off on this one. This one was insane this morning. I don't know if anyone took those calls with me yesterday. I already had some calls that I had picked up on Monday, and then I bought some more yesterday for the 1050. So this was actually a very crazy move on when we had that pullback back in here, and specifically when they held 840s, 850s, and then yesterday again. Like if you kind of delete the ones in between, you can see how good of a job they did like holding these ranges in here. Areas for today are closer to that 1132, 1150 spot, which again, they also did a really good job of sustaining down here. In pre-market, they took it to that 1132, but then held. Based on where this stalled in pre-market, it stalled 1330. Okay, so I had color coordinated these flags. So 1330 was linked to 1220, which is linked to 1465. Okay, so the 1220 break right here is kind of what took some time this afternoon. I don't know if you guys can see that. This area here. CL stalled right at my 93.78 target from yesterday, so I wanted to point that out because I feel like this is very important for ES. Hi, and thank you for 16 months. I didn't even know that you could do that. You're the best. Okay, and then SPX is basically just nesting at core ranges here. So yesterday they stalled the exact spots that we figured they would stall. So remember how yesterday I had said that it would be best if basically SPX gets back to this area here, which would be the same thing as ES getting back to our 7120s, 30s. Okay, we're 7120s and 30s the absolute best for odds in terms of closing price? This is one of the last remarks I made yesterday. No, but it was still a core area, so it was still good. It's just not, it like in terms of like clearing at this point, we need above 71.44. Like those kinds of opening ranges are what's going to give us the better odds, okay? So we ended up pinning the close yesterday at 7122, I believe, on ES. Yeah, 71.22, and then we opened at 71.25. I went over something extremely complex yesterday, but it honestly made sense based on zone theory. I'm not going to go over that right now because it's a little too complicated, but I did try making a bit of a cheat code last night. It's not perfect, so I might have to go back and adjust this a little bit, but we're basically in an area right now where the market's obviously trying to make a decision, right? And this is what we discussed on Sunday in the report. I'm just going to pull up the report. Hey Naz, thank you so much for watching. Like considering the fact that you don't even trade. Thank you. Yeah, today's been a really good day actually, and not from the index, but from these swing trades that I did. This one was up 20% today almost. Options went up 400%. I picked up the calls on the 1050s yesterday at like 40 cents. They're just over $2 right now, which was a really good trade. I haven't really done many individual stocks in a while, so no, I didn't. I was watching NVIDIA MU, but no, I didn't trade those. I traded some Apple, but I had my other individual plays that I had to manage. And I still had my oil play too, so. In CL. But MU was a good call, so was AMD. All the semis did really well today. MU was also off a clearance spot too, by the way. This area here, like the 455. off here is what takes it back to 505 eventually. I don't know who's trading that, but MU cleared. Okay. But to be fair, I wasn't at my computer the whole day today. I had to go see my optometrist this morning, so I didn't want to take on anything new. Okay, on ES, we already knew that if we can get some structural closing points at a minimum around our 2-2 spot, 2-8, 3-2, it would at least give us odds of getting back to core ranges, right? So core ranges technically start around 6-6, 6-8. They're not the best odds. Ideally, you want to get closer to like 7-1, 7-4, 7-8. These areas up here, okay? The better range would have been closer to like 4-4, which you guys already know we stalled 3-8-7-5, 3-9 yesterday. But 4-4 and 4-6-7-5 would have given us the better probabilities. 4-8, 4-9 is the top of the channel. I'm just going to mark 4-9 for now. And then 5-2, 5-1, whatever is the entry into the mean. So do you see how this is just nesting perfectly within our ranges? And in terms of odds, we had Monday's odds was very simple. It was kind of just a retest of the 70, 85, and then get back to this to the 71, 22, 42, and potentially repin the close from Friday, which clearly this wasn't the best repin, right? Like they ended up stalling 71.60.50 and they closed 71.52. It kind of gave it the odds of the 21st. 21st was the earliest odds of retesting highs and retesting lows, which we already know our upside overhead is 7188, right? And we know our downside is 7080, right? Everyone's on the same page, like this area here. So this day was kind of more of our inside day, and that's what I discussed on the report, as Monday being likely an inside day structure, okay? If you're sitting around the 7150s, 60s, you're basically inside structure, lower odds. This is where I'm just going to copy paste, where you could see some kind of choppier price action. This was the idea to start the week. So if market neutralizes in this zone, so 7102, 03, 10, that's where they opened, it makes sense that the market could probably hold, try to push back up, okay? If it fails, then it'll give the full reset. This area basically neutralizes things. Because we were in the 6th bar, we're in the 7th bar now. This is what the odds were. So odds were that we had higher odds of inside ranges early on in the week, so like Monday. Odds of trying to retest on Tuesday, so yesterday, likely to hit and clear range or come to somewhat of a decision point midweek, okay? This was my Sunday report, okay? This was my final, and I don't know why it pastes like this on here. I'll paste it on the Substack chat. So early week is supposed to be a bit choppier, volatile, two-sided price action. I think that is exactly what happened. You can see like the two-directional price action. Okay. And they kind of brought it back to a median. This period here is when market should start coming to its deciding point, okay, from the 22nd to the 24th. Ideally by the 23rd. 23rd is the final day before multiple flips, so that would be the closing candle, okay, on this day. So what could that imply for today? What do you guys think? What does that mean for today? This is exactly where we want to be nesting, because remember 7140s and 60s is the area that is essentially going to trigger volatility at some point. This is the area we want to be nesting in. You can see overnight price action was really clean. They brought this back up after holding 7100, basically like this neutral zone. I'll draw the zone on here just so you guys can see it, but so here's the zone. Do you see what I'm saying? They basically held the zone into the close, brought it back neutral, okay, like the yellow orange areas, and then pinned it green, right? Green is technically bullish, okay? Overnight price action, they did a really good job of sustaining 71.32, basing above 2.4. They never brought this back beneath 71.20s, right? All night last night. You can kind of see that they held it above the 71.20, 21.22 area. So that was progressive price action, because I did say if they close in the 20s, they have to sustain. That was one of the overnight conditions. They can't close it in the 20s and then come back down to here. That they can't do that. Does that make sense, you guys? Or like they have to progress. The second condition would have been they have to take out this 71.38, 71.40 spot that we failed, right? Which they did, but notice here this time when they did, they held above 71.33. They didn't come back below it like they did back here, okay? And then slowly moved up to 4.2. 4.3. This was the one part in the session last night that I personally thought that they could have improved a little bit, even though they took it back and then brought it back, like in here, like to 4.4, 4.7, 4.8, and then they closed at 4.4. I don't know if you guys can see this right here. That little tiny breach, I think, is what's partially causing them to stall so much in real time today. Okay, so this right here. I would have preferred that they did not come back beneath 3.3 and instead held maybe closer to like 3.8, like maybe, or even 3.6, okay? Like this range in here, I think would have been a better area for this to come back to. It's not that going back beneath 2.8 was terrible, but I think that caused them to not progress it as much, especially since they took it back beneath there, or even the 3.5 point range, like beneath 71.32, 33. And this could be why they're still not progressing over 7.1, okay? Or the more ideal area would have been holding 3.6, which would have retested 7.4 real-time stall yesterday, this area in here. Does that make sense? Obviously, if they held closer to 3.8, 3.9, that would have been the better case scenario, and that's what likely would have gotten us 7.6. But this is where I started noticing some slight faults, I guess, or negatives in overnight price action, although they still stayed between our range, which was staying between the 20s, 30s, 40s, okay? And then saving those 60s for real time. So then they ended up coming back, kind of stalled. You can see that they stalled a lot in the 40s in here. This was kind of the last breach right back in here around like London session at 4 a.m. until this is when it started progressing. So you see the 3.3 hold. I don't know if you guys can see that, the 3.6 hold. I don't have all the spots marked up here, but we can mark the 5.1 and 5.4 area. And then you see right here in real time when it started finally holding, just before real time, sorry, when it finally started holding 3.8. So in real time so far, so if we're looking at this from a real time perspective, so we opened the session today at 71.50.25. That's not a bad open, okay? At least it's above the channel, which gives us odds of doing what? What does that give us odds of? This is where you guys have to start kind of putting the two and two together. So 71.50 open. That's not a bad open. It's not like the best open for like full range or anything like that, but it's a good open to do what? Avoid what? I'll let you guys think of a few things because I want to set some alerts on this. Yeah, avoid staying stuck in the channel. Thank God, because we did not want to do what we did on Monday again, okay? So at least we're not going to stay stuck in the channel. So in terms of price action, I would say that was a good open to avoid that at the very least, okay? When they came and opened us this morning, you can kind of see they first kind of stalled 5.1, 5.2. They took it back to 40, 1. Okay, this isn't terrible because at least they're holding above 3.8, 3.6, okay? But do you understand that if they would have held 4.4, we probably would have tested 7.1 by now? The reason why they did this is because they didn't do this back in here. So it's kind of like they're resetting it here. So they have to do what they failed to do. So basically the 3.6 hold here, the 3.8 holds in here, okay? Like 3.8 holding here, 3.9, 4.1. Does that make sense? And then you start building and basing. So they ended up stalling 6.6 almost immediately this morning, which was good because that shows that they are trying to progress. It's just they didn't have like the full advantage. And this is kind of what ends up playing out on sessions like this, because technically speaking, has this already done everything it needs to do today, specifically for the 22nd? Which is, again, yeah, I think so. Like, based on that, like, at least they brought it back to the 40s and 60s. And they're reacting a little bit better this time than they did previously, okay? What are we trying to do today? And it's very obvious. And think about it from this sense of things. Look at where they're now holding. So odds start getting a tiny bit better once you start sustaining above 4.4. This is what we failed to do previously. Don't forget that. So remember when I'll go back in time to show you guys. Remember when we failed to hold back in here, okay, here. They first took it up, stalled 7.1. This was yesterday. And then when they came back, this is what created that volatility, right? We had the most volatility once we failed 4.6, 7.5, 4.4, correct? In yesterday's session. And I did a bit of a range theory yesterday, and it was insane because it actually worked out super well when looking at this from, I noticed that market when we open in areas like this works in around 41-point intervals. So when I tested it, this was crazy. It actually was exactly 41 points. So I was like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. It was like 41 to 36-point intervals. And then when I went back to see this range in here, this was 36 points, okay, from highs to here. So from highs to 4.7, 4.6, it was 36 points. From opening range to this low structure break, it was roughly 41 points. So I'm like, okay, and which I sent that analysis yesterday. And so I figured that that's probably where they could start capping max range. This is where you'd be at a much bigger concern, okay, is coming back to 70, 70, 80, okay? But they kept it within the 36-point interval, okay, versus 41. Do you see that? Look. And that equates to 785. It's actually pretty insane. And that was based on that kind of open. So when we open in the channel or means, that seems to be a common trend. I haven't really tested it fully today, but I would imagine that this area in here is probably where there's going to be some overhead. And if we look at it from like where they pinned the close to, they pinned it at 71.22, which is wild. Because look, if 71.22 was the 36-point range, 41-point range off that low, do you see that? Is right around the 2.6, and that's close to where they opened. So I think that those ranges are pretty accurate. And I haven't fully tested that in real time today, but where did we open today? At that 50 spot, I think. Usually on days like this, because it starts working in 17-point. Yeah, see, this is insane, you guys. It starts working in 17-point intervals. So 16 to 17 points is what I was talking about last night. I'm going to go here. You guys want to read this? This is what I was looking at last night. Okay, channel is usually 16 to 17 points. Okay, every zone is roughly that much. Okay, so specifically the channel and the means, those areas are 16, 17 points. You're not going to see any progression until you start breaking that range. Okay, so if and when we do, that's where I think we could see those types of moves, like the moves of the 36, 41, 37 points. Okay, so that explains likely why we're stuck, okay, in this area here so far. In addition to overnight price action, okay, so now that we're holding 4746, do our odds increase of coming back and actually taking out 6466 this time? That's off this low range. Off opening range, we have to take out 6-6. That's kind of why we're stalling there. That's the 16, 17 point range from open right here. Do you see that? So there's some alignment at 6-7. That's what can make this very sticky price action. Remember last week, you guys, on Friday, these were the minimum pin conditions. I don't know if you guys remember that, because I feel like you guys forget things as soon as they're like gone. You're like, oh, that's in the past. But I remember on Friday, our calculated spots were around the 6-7, 6-8, 6-9. On what day was that? The 17th? And those were, yeah, it was this area. Okay, this is kind of what accounts to this, the 6-7, 50, 6-9. Okay, so for Friday's close, that's the ratios that we wanted. And that was based on core ratios. How many points are core ratios typically? So from where we closed, which was, this I can clear. How many points are core ratios usually? And this is very easy because, and like, look at the 34 points from close and open, okay? That's that. This is why I'm saying they could start making this a bit pinnable in these areas, especially, this is why they're kind of sticky between like 36, 41, 44 point intervals. So right now we're basically stuck within a 34 to 44 point interval, which is the 17-17, okay? These, usually when you have days like that, they're almost always inside ranges. This is a common rule I made up, by the way, so you can use this all the time. And you're not really going to see any progression until you start obviously breaking that. So an open above 5-8, 5-9 I think would have been a bit better than 5-7. So that's where there could be that tiny reduction and why we're not getting breaks over 6-6 to like 7-1, 7-4 area. But do you see how these areas here are, like, this is the 4-1 range where they're stalling? Do you see how these areas could be extremely pinnable? For today. What's another way of looking at this? Since this is a core, it's, even though the dynamics of this are within the channel and means, what kind of open close did we get? The 7120s. What kind of open close is that? This is our only advantage, really, if price behaves. What's our advantage? That's a core area, right? Okay, so what kind of increments could we apply based on open close ratios? What ratios would we be able to apply here that could bypass? It might not be in real time since this is session open, session close, but yeah, so what would be our next range if we're looking at this from a core ratio perspective? So we're clearly within 34, 44 point ratios today. Okay, from open, close, highs, lows. But, and it's clear that 6.6, 6.7, 6.8, 6.9 has a ton of overhead, which is what's preventing us from getting the bigger core breaks above 7.1. What kind of ranges would we be working in, potentially? Considering this circumstance, okay? So obviously there's multiple core ratios, but considering the current circumstances, what kind of ratios would we likely move in? Probably the 50s, okay? So like 52, 56, 58, that's what we want to try to target, okay? What day of the week is it today? This is very important, by the way. Midweek is always so important, okay? So if we had 52, 51 point ratios, that's where we would at least maybe see an odd of getting 5, 71, 77, 78, okay? 71, 74 at the minimum, okay, off the 2-2. Off the lows, it's going to be right around there too. 7173, which I think was close to yesterday's real-time high, if I'm not mistaken. This was yesterday's real-time high. So do you see how if they push us in those ratios, that's the only way that they could try to reset today's close at a better core range, okay? And those seem like the more probable increments. I highly doubt that they can push this, the 72, 75, 78 points. And this is just on a low level, okay? Because if they moved 58 points, 55, they're within the 70s for the most part. I don't think, do any of these trigger 80s? Maybe the ones off the 2.5 could, but yeah, like maybe 8.1. The one off here off 2.5 I think is 8.3. Yeah, it is, which is right to yesterday's highs, okay? And usually like max for those mid ratios are usually around 58-ish, okay? Like 58, 59 points. So do you see how these closing points still made it? So regardless, they don't really take out yesterday's highs, maybe just slightly or tag it, or the all-time high based on those ratios, unless they fully expand, right? Which if they want to fully expand, that's what's going to give us like 7200s. And at that point, they would have to really probably start moving quickly. And I don't think that based on time, there's only 2 hours left in the day, okay? Does that make sense from just like a math perspective and time perspective based on today having some odds but not the highest? So what do you think they're trying to do today? And on Friday, we talked about this. So these were off our 70, 58. These were calculated areas where they closed. And 70, 57, this is where they had the 106, 107 point pins, right? And clearly they couldn't get any real structural breaks. So could they try to reset Friday's pin or Monday's real-time open? Because Monday's real-time open was, I'm pretty sure, let me go back to Monday. Monday's open was 71.48. So there's a tiny, tiny differential there, okay, of like 2 points. Monday's close, I think, is where we stalled in the 50s. Yeah, it is, like 71.50.75. Okay, so the behavior is quite similar, and this is where they stalled the 60.50 area and couldn't really get the full structure break. Okay. To get a better reset from those closing points, you probably need at least the 107 or 103, which is kind of keeping us pretty stuck to where we already are trading, okay? Versus the 110 ratio would be closer to 6.8, and then 115 is closer to that 7.2. Anything beneath 7.4 still keeps us stuck, correct? So it doesn't really do anything for us for today, but it technically can progress us for the second half of the week. Does that make sense, you guys? Because if they want to delay, they can keep us in these ranges until next week, okay? Because we're durational till the 28th. So if they don't want to break range till Monday, they technically don't have to. All they have to do is kind of stay now afloat above these areas here, okay? So technically the 23rd is the best odd this week of getting these structure breaks, and I did ideally want to try tagging at least 71.88 this week. Even if we tag it and come back down, I don't really care, as long as they touch that area, okay? Because it at least gives us a probability of getting into that zone, whether it's later in the month or if they come back reverse and then take it back, okay? It just at least gives us a probability. The 24th is the 10-day flip, so, or not the 10 days, sorry, I think it was the 7 days, the 23rd flip, so today would be the final day on this time frame. Oh, this is actually getting the full break. And then we've been working with like 8.5 day intervals, so I figured that we could see a mid-range on the 24th. So do you guys understand the concept of this today is either getting the core ratios, if they can break out of the 44-point intervals, okay, or maybe just get like a reset of the 103, 107, 106, 110-point ratios, which I don't know how many of you guys are actually subscribed to my reports anyway, but this is kind of complex. So, and this is kind of the cheat code. This is where obviously this is where we have the full reset. So they kind of held 7100 yesterday. This is where it expands. So we're basically in this area here, okay? 70s would be our best bet, but I don't think they're going to do that. I feel like they have to start moving quickly. And when we looked at the actual calculated odds right here, okay, these here, these were the extensions, okay? So using 70, 55, 58 as the base. So I'm trying my best to explain this in a way that it makes sense, but and if it doesn't make sense, you can tell me. This is kind of the area that they kept it in on Friday and Monday, okay? This is the area that we'd probably want to get to that at least gives us an odd of getting basically 2 to 3 points above highs, which is what would get us that 8-8 tag. Does that make sense? This area is obviously better, and we just looked at why that's better, like around 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, 7.6. This is basically the spot that would give us like odds of full triggers. Even though it looks bad because it looks like a lower high, it's actually a progressive close. Does that make sense? Like, someone might look at this and say, oh, well, they made a lower high, but it's actually, if it's a better structural calculated ratio, it's not technically a lower high, it's a progressive close specific to the date that we're hitting and closing that price point at, okay? So these were the ratios, okay? This is kind of close to where they stalled. They stalled like 10, I don't know why I didn't include 107 in here, that's weird. They stalled around 107, okay? So our goal is basically to try getting breaks above that 104, 107 ratio. And if they do, it would be at least this 110 area, which again doesn't really give us the best odds, but it at least makes it a progressive close. Does that make sense? And again, like I was saying here, if you look at this from where they're stalling right now, okay, the 44 off this open, we've already stalled, I think, that 41 we said, right? So 44 points is that 6-9, okay? I'll go over this one last time before I get back to my positions. This is 6-6. This already hit 4-5, okay? So I know for a fact that that area is a pretty big overhead. So I think I'm going to say that those are probably my max ranges, I think, like around the 6-7, 6-9. Maybe some tiny odds of getting a 7-2 to 7-3, 7-4 push. That would be the best case, but in terms of odds, I think they're a little bit low. So we'll have to see what they end up doing. I'm just going to reset the chart. Okay, does that make a bit more sense, you guys, in terms of that? And we had better odds around close to like the end of session, but not quite end of session, like usually around just before 3. I want to see if they can at least get this above 5-8, because 5-8 would have been the better closing or opening, better opening point today. And I think that that reduction here, like off the 5-8 versus like 50, it's kind of the same reduction that they did overnight. So remember how I said back in here, you would have wanted to hold ideally above 3-6, 3-8. That was also taken away from the open today. I think a 5-8 open would have been a bit better, and kind of like how I explained earlier. And this is also probably why we're not getting those 7-3 odds today. Does that make sense? Okay, so at least getting here before the last hour, I think would at least give us a probability of, at the very least, retesting 6-6, 6-7, 6-8. Okay, and if we get lucky and we get some 70s, then that's great. It's midweek reset. We're trying to reset odds for the week, okay? And if you watch Sunday's stream, which unfortunately wasn't recorded, just transcribed, but this is what I went over. I went over those core ratios. So try not to forget the hour discussion we had on Sunday, because it was based on those open close ratios. And even though those might not be like the the highest odds, actually I have visuals for it. Hold on. Even though it might not be the highest odds, they were still relatively good odds, okay? Do you guys see this? So even though the 50s seemed bad, these were off lows. I highlighted the red areas off lows. Do you see why this week we didn't really have the best odds based on where they were closing, where they were opening, where they were hitting highs? Like we opened around 71.50. We stalled at 71.61 on Monday. Do you get what I mean? So this is partially why. It's because these were the ratios off lows, okay? Off the lows on the 16th versus off the close or open. So in terms of odds, it didn't really give us the highest probability, okay? These areas in here. The areas that start giving us better odds are around the 6-8, 6-7, but best odds, like I had said before, were for sure around the 7-5, 7-6 plus, closer to those 80s, okay? So that's just a reminder in case you guys forgot. These areas here basically caused confliction. So hopefully that helps refresh your memories, because you guys might have forgotten. Okay. I don't know if I want to stream the full hour, to be honest, but maybe I'll stream the last half hour of the session, because I just want to focus on some of my positions today. But these were crypto's getting that nice clean move that we talked about too, and this one we were measuring in, I think we said 27, 28, and 41 intervals. So this is durational till the 27th, I think we said. This is what gave the continuation. In here. On that structure close. I still haven't published that. I'll publish that today when I publish the midweek report from last Saturday's stream, because that's where I went over this, Poet, Plug, and a few others. Plug is kind of stuck within these ranges. I don't think that this one's like quite, I feel like it could just be basing a 2-day formation or something, or maybe on a wider frame, but because it did get stuck in an inside range. These are the ones that I'd be maybe a little bit more cautious about, but technically the daily could still get a break by tomorrow. So as long as they keep it above, I think that 322.21. So far, ES stalling that 5.5, 5.8, 5.9 ahead of 3. So remember how I said that they could technically keep us within these ranges for the rest of the week? If they don't break 6466, could they just keep us recycled within these areas basically over the next 2 days? What do you guys think? Yeah, you could, I guess against like some of the tech names or even semis. Some of them are still moving though. So if they don't really progress much today, but they keep us within those 40s and 60s, basically an inside day, we could see a second day of this kind of PA, okay? And I know that sounds boring, but those are usually the days where if you stay stuck between 34, 44 point intervals, they're usually the highest odds of inside ranges, okay? So, and you don't usually get structure breaks until one end break. So from lows, we're not breaking 44 points. From opening range, we're not breaking 34. So that can make it a little bit difficult. Yesterday we had a good range break of like 88 points, which is why kind of like doubled in range basically, okay? And specifically off real-time highs, which was the 7.2 area. Do you see that? So another day of this, I wouldn't be surprised. The only issue is actually, is that really an issue? If our 7-day doesn't exhaust, okay, but also doesn't expand, what do you guys make of that? This is our continuation cycle. I would say at the very least, if they can't take out these highs, we probably at least want to close above, okay? So tomorrow would be the final day for that to occur. So we'd want to close above 6.4. I think that could just set our conditions for tomorrow. If they keep us stuck today. That's the worst case if they want to keep this in double inside range, okay? Which could then end up looking basically like another inside bar tomorrow, okay? With maybe a slightly progressive close. Does that make sense? Something like that. And then maybe we get a range break on the 24th flip date. I'm just keeping that scenario in mind in case we don't get 6.7 breaks today, okay? If we get those structure breaks today, then we have at least an odd of getting the 7.6, 8.1, 8.8 retest tomorrow. I would love to trigger 8.8 by Friday, but if they don't do that this week, then we still have the window until the 28th. I would be more concerned if we don't trigger that between the 24th and 28th window. So between specifically the Friday and Monday session, okay? Any questions, guys, before I shut off the stream? I might come back end of day to just do a late day stream. I don't know if I'll do it on Twitch and YouTube or Discord, but um, I feel like today's pretty straightforward, to be honest. And longs and shorts. Usually days like this too are days that I always recommend that you trade individual names, right? So lots of individual plays moved today. Semis all moved. Tech names all had really good range. Something else that also stood out to me today was the fact that crude was still moving up. Do you think that was helping ES extend? Yeah, that's not helping, right? So this isn't helping. This is also not accelerating above 93.78. So they're both kind of stuck here, okay? I still have my crude hedge, by the way. That doesn't expire till Friday. Just in case we stall the 60s, because can we stall the 60s and have a big reversal for the 23rd, 24th, back to retest 70.80? Yes, we can. Okay, like we still haven't broken either end this week. So, and those are the two ends that we're trading in between. Just so far, based on how we held yesterday, where we opened, overnight conditions, where we're stalling, it's leaning more towards trying to get at least a 66, 71, 68, 69 reset, but I'll keep both odds open. If they take us back into the channel this afternoon, like in the last hour, that's not terrible, but that could really keep us stuck for the rest of the week, okay? So I would prefer that they don't come back beneath 3844, but and keep it above the 50 in this white box here. On SPX, it's also keeping us in the bull zone, okay? So you have to remember that on SPX, this is still in the bull zone, in the 20s. But same thing, they're stalling 3-2. Okay, I'm going to manage this because I missed that 8-3 trigger. Hopefully my contract filled because I did have a sell order for one of the contracts. I still think that this one they could push. When I was watching this one earlier today, there were a few bull flags that were forming that formed into like partial bear flags. I don't know if you guys see this. And then they did a really good job trying to negate. I was also watching this period here, closer to like the 10 a.m. window. I don't know if you guys can see that, like 10:30. It was like around, basically just over this period here, like closer to here. Do you see this? Like around 10:30, 10:45. Okay, and that's when they held, do you see that? Or 11:50. And that's kind of the point in time where they had to really try holding off 12:20. So this here I think flipped at 1, flips again at 3:15. So there were some odds on this at 3:15, which I was waiting for, but based on how long they prolong this is for sure now over like a 210 200-minute ratio. I think it's closer to like this 200-minute. Do you see that too? This is why I'm thinking they could keep this durational into tomorrow and overnight. I don't remember exactly what time frame it was, but this was part of the issue that I saw. You see how they didn't take out the highs? Like here. I don't know who's trading this one, but this is linked with 157. See, a lot of these are after hours, so it makes me wonder if they might move in the after hours instead. But that's why I would have preferred that they at least tested or tried to retest these areas during this point in time, okay? Which they didn't. They did at least get the partial retest here, I guess, of like these closing ratios. I don't know if you see this, like where these candles opened, closed. but like in this area in here, which is what could still keep it valid, but they really need to come back and try retesting those ranges, I would say. Because that would have been the better odd. I want to mainly see if they'd get it back over like that 1260, 1257. This is what could keep it extended, and a lot of these odds are pretty late in the session today. There was a window that opens up at 3:15, so I think Eddie and one other person was trading this. Another thing I figured is maybe not off the 1150 structural hold, but another way we can look at this is maybe the structural points where they held 1220, because this is kind of where they brought it back up, so closer to like that 1243 period. These ones basically run until close. That's kind of the only concern. Okay. I don't know if you guys can see that. It is kind of stuck inside. But these ones run until basically after hours off those secondary structures. Most of the structures off of our low periods here have kind of passed. That was here. It could have also been from this. So we'll see. There is one secondary period around 3:15, but the rest of these odds on this they're pretty late, which obviously doesn't help if you have option contracts, but if you have some commons, make sure you stay around in the after hours for this one. Okay. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, guys. If I feel the need to stream the last half hour, I will. I wanted to kind of see if they hold here after 3 and if they can start pushing back range. Some periods that you could probably look for this afternoon. There wasn't, I don't usually time days like this, by the way, because they're range bound days. So for me, it's mainly just getting there by end of session. Okay, so usually days like this, I just want to see structure basis off price and end of session, especially because I feel like it's just a waste of time. Okay, and it is, because this is, as long as it's a base structure and I know what my calculated price points are, which we do, right? The 3844 4675. Okay, so I know for a fact that it could still be durational till close. The only issue is right here when they stalled 5859 before 3. That this is what could reduce odds of getting the full breaks to these ranges, but can still keep those other odds in play. What time did they trigger this morning? Close to like 10:20, 10:30. There usually isn't very many odds around those times of day. Those are usually durational till close, like you see. I mean, the only thing that you could do, I guess, is a median range, which 200, that would have been this structure hold right here. So if they hold structure, that's what could keep it durational, which it looks like they did. This would have been the structural hold period back in here. You could also maybe look to see what this period here. This is from opening range to the high range, so there could be a period where they try getting it back above 5758 right here. And this is what could, some of these odds are after the close. Like a lot of odds today are after the bell for ES2, but if they can at least get it back above here, I think, around this period, then it at least keeps these odds in play of like 6-1, 6-4. But in terms of timing today, it's honestly, it's just relative because, and you can maybe, since this was a calculated period here, you could maybe use this window, which I think that window would take us after the bell, wouldn't it? Yeah, it does. So that, I don't know, maybe they have news. Well, I guess that makes sense with earnings, but that could be another reason why. Oh, that could actually be a reason why we also move today too, so let's not forget that. And why they might want to keep it stuck. Sometimes when we have major earnings, they keep things stuck in range to kind of, so if that's the case, if we're above 6.6, 6.7 into the close, then I would imagine that that we might see some good numbers from Tesla because they would probably relate to the two. Okay, 392 is the target on Tesla. This is the area on Tesla that gives you better upside, along with 394 and this 398. 400.15 was the area that we were looking for previously for these kind of structural breaks to 423, 425. So maybe I'll come back closer to the close to see how this trades, but you can look at the two being correlated. And then 387 to 388 is the area that you really want to try sustaining on this one. Ideally back over 389, 66, 390. I just want to see how this reacts at this calculated period, and then I'll sign off. You remember how it was plus 22 yesterday? It's snowing 10 centimeters on Friday. I think my alerts for this went off. So some of the better ways to trade this, guys, if you didn't trade ES, is you could have just done Friday expirations. That's what I did, just because I didn't want to be stuck sideways like this. Even though this is still progressive price action, obviously it's not the best PA for premiums. And then set that. Okay, let's see. If they get this back over 5758 during this interval, then I think odds are setting up pretty good for the close. There's some odds for after hours, guys, though, at like 4:09, 4:10 p.m. FYI for ES. Six one was also calculated from the prior session, so, but I think this would be like the minimum. This is almost the same thing as getting SPX back over 2.2, okay? I guess the way to think about this too, guys, is we're basically, you know how like 71, 30, 38, and 40 are overheads on ES? Basically, SPX has to get back above these ranges here. So it's the same thing. So far, this looks pretty constructive. Did you guys have a good trading day today? What did you guys end up trading? There was a lot of really good moves today across the board in multiple sectors, not just not just tech, mainly tech, but oil had some good moves. Healthcare had a few movers. I traded Apple, but there were some really good moves in like Oracle, which usually my go-to are those lower volatility names, but I was busy this morning. I didn't check Intel. I don't think Intel had this one. We could maybe watch for end of week because this one had a bit of a reversal. Apple was a lot stronger than Microsoft. So I did Apple, which I didn't get to do any of the semi names though, but this was a really good one. I think most people in the Discord did Apple too. Yeah, we're basically resetting the close, guys, so don't get overboard. Okay, this is a good structural break here off that 315. Do you see that? Back over that 1264. So this is, again, if you just look at it this way, this was the point in the day where it could try resetting, even though odds now are pretty low that they will bring this back. But if you look at the real-time lows, or real-time highs, sorry, okay, and their low or opening points, you have to start sustaining here, okay? These are what I call clearance breaks, and you could use this on anything really, but okay, even though we had better odds of getting those breaks around this point in the day and they didn't, this is a period where they can try to reset that probability, okay? Otherwise, odds are until after session or after hours, at least for retesting overnight highs, okay? This though can still keep odds in play for testing real-time highs. Does that make sense? And this was the midpoint here, this candle. So the idea was to see if they can, ideally if they can get this above that, this 1264, whatever that spot was, because basically this was the candle that sold us off this morning, then they have some odds to get it back to these price points into the close. I forget who the other person in the chat was that was trading this Clark. Okay, I tagged you guys in that anyway. Yes, really good moves off these calculated points, you guys, especially after getting back over 71, 58, 59. There were some calculated odds around this 16, 17, 18 periods. It was roughly a 3-minute interval, kind of like back in here. Are you seeing that clearance now here? You're welcome. That seemed like the best period. So ES cleared, calculated time above 71.58. This is what gives the highest odds, like I said, of getting back to 6-1, 6-4, 6-6 retest. And if they do so at this interval, then they have some odds of clearing in real time today. We could also maybe watch now that we're seeing that these are for sure the calculated periods, we could maybe look to see because it was roughly 52 minutes. 52 to 53 minutes. I think that's what we said. Yes, okay, so roughly 52 to 53 minutes. You can maybe track 70 minutes as like the lower high. Okay, this is pretty accurate, specifically from here. So this could be like the wider window, like around the 3:30 period, but, and this is specific to sustaining around 224 because this was a calculated range. And this is mainly because they brought this back above 71, 57, 58, which is what we wanted to have happen here. But they're being very strategic about keeping this a little bit stuck. Okay, if you look at maybe a mid interval, then maybe they could have some late day odds right here, okay, before the close, but so far this is looking pretty constructive, guys. This was the best odds, by the way, for an SPX trade, since we didn't really have many clearance breaks. So this is, obviously today was very slow, but this was XPX type of trade. And this is basically to get SPX from 71.22 back to 3.2 retest. Same sort of idea in terms of like SPX range versus ES range. ES is getting the break back from 5.1, 5.2 to 5.8, and then 6.1, 6.4, ideally 6.6. You can sometimes use the high range too, so like you see how they kind of stalled within, like the first stall was 6 minutes and then they started stalling 18-minute intervals. Sometimes you can use those too as like a extension. So, and that makes sense too because that's going to be like the rough median between here and close. Usually based on that, it seemed like they had roughly 7 to 8 minutes in here. 6. So you probably want to see how price reacts around that 6 bar, which would be here, because that's where it started exhausting last time. And then if you want, those are off the actual calculated times. If you want to measure off the points when it broke, it would be closer to the 2.4, 2.5 window, which is probably that 9-minute interval. Okay. So you definitely need to be above 6.1, I would say. And these are likely the odds of retesting this afternoon, like the earliest odds of these retests. You can mark that 35 window here too, you guys. And then what did we say was the midpoint between the 409 and 410? I know it's not the 4 o'clock window, but this is if they wanted to try breaking range. It's roughly like 26 minutes or so, so around like 3:43, 3:45, this period here. If they tried pushing range early, you could measure from 4, which this is probably what leads into like late day breaks, which I would imagine is the case because we're trying to pin the close. So 21-minute intervals are close to like this 3:38. So yeah, into like the last 15 minutes of the close, basically, maybe just before that. I'll send you guys a copy of this so you have it if you want to follow along. Okay. Good luck the last half hour, and